Sarah Martinez sat quietly in the corner of her 7th grade classroom, her eyes fixed on the worksheet in front of her. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the desks where her classmates worked on their assignments. She had always been a quiet girl, preferring to keep to herself rather than join the loud conversations and gossip that filled the hallways of Jefferson Middle School. The classroom buzzed with the usual chatter of 13-year-olds discussing weekend plans and sharing stories about their families. Sarah listened half-heartedly, her mind wandering to thoughts of her mother, who had been deployed overseas for the past 6 months. Lieutenant Commander Maria Martinez was a Navy SEAL, one of the few women to have earned that prestigious title, and Sarah missed her terribly. "My dad took me fishing last weekend," announced Jake Thompson, a popular boy who sat 2 rows ahead of Sarah. "We caught 5 bass and a catfish. He's teaching me how to clean them properly." "That's nothing," chimed in Madison Clark, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. "My mom and I went shopping in the city. She bought me these new boots that cost $300. She says money isn't an object when it comes to making me happy." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, remembering the care package she had helped her father prepare for her mother just the night before. They had carefully packed protein bars, letters from home, and photos from Sarah's recent track meet. Her father had explained that her mother was stationed somewhere dangerous, somewhere where communication was limited and packages took weeks to arrive. The conversation continued around her, with each student trying to top the last with stories of family adventures and accomplishments. Sarah found herself thinking about the last video call she had shared with her mother 3 weeks ago. The connection had been poor, with static crackling through the speakers, but she could see the determination in her mother's eyes even through the grainy footage. "What about you, Sarah?" asked Mrs. Henderson, their English teacher, who had been listening to the students share their stories. "Would you like to tell us about your family?" All eyes turned toward Sarah, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She had never been comfortable being the center of attention, and the sudden focus made her stomach flutter with nervousness. She glanced around the room, seeing the expectant faces of her classmates, some genuinely curious and others already showing signs of boredom. "My mom is serving overseas," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. "She's a Navy SEAL." The classroom fell silent for a moment, and then Jake Thompson let out a loud snort of laughter. "Yeah, right," he said, turning around in his seat to face Sarah directly. "Girls can't be SEALs. That's a man's job. My uncle was in the Navy, and he told me all about it." Madison joined in with a smirk. "Sarah, you don't have to make up stories to sound cool. We know your family isn't that special. My dad says the SEALs are the toughest soldiers in the world, and they only pick the strongest men." Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment and anger. "I'm not lying," she said, her voice growing stronger despite the tremors she felt inside. "My mother really is a SEAL. She's been deployed for 6 months. "Prove it," demanded Tyler Walsh, a boy who rarely spoke but always seemed to appear whenever there was drama. "If your mom is really a SEAL, show us some proof. Where are her medals? Where are her pictures in uniform?" Sarah's hands clenched into fists under her desk. She thought about the shadow box in their living room at home, filled with her mother's commendations and ribbons. She remembered the photographs of her mother with her unit, faces painted with camouflage, weapons slung over their shoulders. But those items felt too precious, too personal to bring to school for the entertainment of classmates who wouldn't believe her anyway. "I don't have to prove anything to you," Sarah replied, her voice shaking slightly. "I know what my mother does, and that's enough." Jake laughed again, louder this time, and several other students joined in. "She's totally making it up," he announced to the class. Sarah the storyteller strikes again. "What's next? Is your dad an astronaut? Is your grandmother a secret agent?" Mrs. Henderson tried to regain control of the classroom, clapping her hands sharply. "That's enough, everyone. Let's get back to our writing assignments." But the damage was done. Sarah could feel the stares and hear the whispered comments from her classmates. She had become the girl who made up stories about her family, the girl who lied to try to fit in. The truth about her mother's service, something that filled Sarah with immense pride and worry, had been twisted into a source of ridicule and disbelief. As the days passed, the teasing only got worse. Students would approach Sarah in the hallways with exaggerated military salutes and fake accents, asking if her SEAL mom had taught her any special combat moves. During lunch, she often ate alone while hearing snippets of conversation from nearby tables where students joked about her fantasy family. "I heard Sarah told Mr. Peterson that her mom is fighting terrorists," she overheard Madison saying to a group of girls. "Like, seriously, does she think we're stupid? Next she'll probably say her mom knows the president or something." Sarah tried to ignore the comments, but each one felt like a small knife cutting into her heart. She began to dread going to school, knowing that each day would bring new humiliation and disbelief. Her grades started to suffer as she found it difficult to concentrate on her studies while constantly worrying about the next confrontation with her classmates. At home, her father noticed the change in her behavior. David Martinez was a quiet man who worked as an accountant for a local firm. He had always been supportive of his wife's military career, even though it meant long separations and constant worry about her safety. He could see that something was troubling his daughter, but Sarah was reluctant to discuss what was happening at school. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" he asked one evening as they sat down for dinner. "You seem a little down lately." Sarah pushed the food around on her plate, not really hungry. "It's nothing, Dad. Just school stuff." David studied his daughter's face, recognizing the same stubborn independence that he saw in his wife. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Sometimes it helps to share what's bothering you." Sarah considered telling her father about the situation at school, but she worried that it would only make him feel bad about her mother's absence. He was already dealing with the stress of managing the household alone and working full-time while his wife was deployed. The last thing Sarah wanted was to add to his burden. "I'm fine, really," she insisted, forcing a smile. "Just tired from all the homework." That night, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about her mother. She wondered if Maria was looking at the same stars from wherever she was stationed. Sarah had memorized the few details her mother had been able to share about her deployment. She knew her mother was part of a special operations unit working to secure dangerous areas and protect innocent civilians. The mission was classified, which meant that Maria couldn't share specific details about her location or activities. Sarah reached for her phone and scrolled through the last few text messages she had received from her mother. Communication was sporadic and often came at odd hours due to the time difference and operational security requirements. The messages were brief but filled with love and encouragement. "Thinking of you every day, baby girl. Stay strong and keep working hard in school. I'm proud of you. Love, Mom." Reading those words brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She wished she could tell her mother about what was happening at school, but she knew that her mother had enough to worry about without adding Sarah's social problems to the list. Maria was risking her life every day to serve her country, and Sarah didn't want to distract her with something as trivial as middle school drama. The next morning brought no relief from the constant teasing. As Sarah walked to her locker, she heard Jake Thompson's voice behind her. "Hey, Special Forces Sarah," he called out, using the nickname that had started to spread throughout the school. "Did your mom call in any airstrikes lately? Maybe she can bomb our math test for us." Sarah's hands trembled as she worked the combination on her locker. She could hear other students laughing at Jake's comment, and she felt completely alone in a school filled with hundreds of people. She grabbed her books quickly and hurried toward her first class, hoping to avoid any further confrontation. In history class, Mr. Peterson was discussing World War II and the various military operations that had helped secure Allied victory. Sarah found herself paying closer attention than usual, thinking about her mother's own service and the sacrifices made by military families throughout history. The success of these operations depended on the courage and dedication of ordinary people who chose to serve something greater than themselves, Mr. Peterson explained. Many of these heroes never received recognition for their contributions, but their efforts made a difference in ways they might never have known. Sarah thought about her mother's unit and the dangerous work they were doing in places most people couldn't even find on a map. She wondered how many other students in her class had family members serving in the military, and whether any of them had to deal with the kind of disbelief and mockery she was experiencing. After class, she approached Mr. Peterson's desk, hoping he might have some advice or understanding about her situation. "Mr. Peterson," she said quietly, waiting for him to finish organizing his papers. "Yes, Sarah? What can I help you with?" "I was wondering, do you think people always believe the truth when they hear it?" Mr. Peterson looked at her thoughtfully, sensing there was more to the question than simple curiosity about historical events. "That's a complex question, Sarah. Sometimes people have difficulty accepting truths that challenge their preconceived notions or seem too extraordinary to believe. History is full of examples of people whose truthful accounts were initially dismissed or ridiculed." Sarah nodded, absorbing his words. "What should someone do if they're telling the truth but nobody believes them?" "Well," Mr. Peterson said, leaning back in his chair, "I think the most important thing is to remember that the truth has a way of revealing itself eventually. People who stand by what they know to be true, even in the face of doubt and criticism, often find that time proves them right." Sarah thanked him and left the classroom feeling slightly better, but still carrying the weight of her classmates' disbelief. She didn't know how long she would have to endure their mockery, or whether the truth about her mother's service would ever be revealed in a way that would convince them. As she walked through the hallways toward her next class, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. No matter how much teasing she had to endure, she would never stop being proud of her mother's service. Maria Martinez was a Navy SEAL, a warrior who had earned her place among the most elite soldiers in the world, and Sarah would continue to honor that truth even if she had to do it alone. The week continued with more of the same treatment from her classmates. Sarah began to feel isolated and frustrated, wondering how long she could tolerate the constant questioning of her family's honor. She started eating lunch in the library to avoid the cafeteria, where the teasing seemed to be at its worst. Little did Sarah know that her mother's unit was preparing for a very special operation, one that would soon bring them much closer to home than anyone could have imagined. The truth about Lieutenant Commander Maria Martinez's service was about to be revealed in a way that would shock everyone at Jefferson Middle School, especially those who had been so quick to doubt her daughter's claims. Sarah continued to attend classes and complete her assignments, but the joy she had once found in learning was overshadowed by the daily struggle of defending her family's honor. She counted the days until her mother's deployment would end, hoping that somehow the truth would eventually shine through the clouds of doubt and disbelief that had settled over her life at school. 3 weeks had passed since the initial confrontation in Mrs. Henderson's classroom, and Sarah's situation at school had only grown worse. What had started as simple disbelief had evolved into a full-scale campaign of mockery that followed her through every hallway and classroom. She had become known throughout Jefferson Middle School as the girl who made up elaborate stories about her family, and the reputation seemed impossible to escape. During math class, when Mrs. Rodriguez asked students to solve word problems involving military logistics, Jake Thompson raised his hand with a smirk. "Maybe we should ask Sarah for help," he said loudly enough for the entire class to hear. Since her mom is supposedly a Navy SEAL, she probably knows all about military operations. The class erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Mrs. Rodriguez tried to maintain order, but Sarah could see the doubt in her teacher's eyes as well. Even the adults were beginning to question whether Sarah was telling the truth about her mother's service. "That's enough disruption for today," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly, but the damage was already done. Sarah spent the rest of the math period staring at her textbook, unable to concentrate on the problems in front of her. At lunch, Sarah retreated to her usual spot in the library, hoping to find some peace among the books and quiet study tables. She pulled out a sandwich her father had packed for her and opened a novel she had been trying to read for English class. The story was about a young girl facing challenges much different from her own, but Sarah found it difficult to focus on the fictional problems when her real-life situation felt so overwhelming. "Mind if I sit here?" asked a quiet voice. Sarah looked up to see Emma Chen, a girl from her science class who had never spoken to her before. Emma was known for being studious and keeping to herself, much like Sarah had done before all the attention surrounding her mother's service began. "Sure," Sarah replied, grateful for any company that didn't involve mockery or disbelief. Emma sat down across from her and unpacked her own lunch. For a few minutes, they ate in comfortable silence, surrounded by the peaceful atmosphere of the library. Finally, Emma spoke up. "I heard what happened in Mrs. Henderson's class," she said softly. "About your mom being a SEAL." Sarah tensed, preparing herself for another round of questioning or ridicule. "I suppose you don't believe it either," she said defensively. "Actually, I do believe you," Emma replied, surprising Sarah completely. "My older brother is in the military, stationed in Germany. He's told me about women serving in combat roles, including special operations. It's not common, but it definitely happens." Sarah felt a rush of relief and gratitude. Finally, someone who didn't immediately dismiss her claims as fantasy. "Really? You believe me?" Emma nodded. "My brother says the military has been opening more positions to women over the past few years. He mentioned that some of the toughest soldiers he knows are women. Just because something is rare doesn't mean it's impossible." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt like she could breathe normally. Having one person believe her story made all the difference in the world. "Thank you for saying that. I was starting to think I was crazy." "You're not crazy," Emma assured her. "You're just dealing with people who don't know what they're talking about. Jake Thompson thinks he's an expert on everything, but most of what he says is just hot air." Sarah smiled for the first time in days. "I wish everyone could understand that. It's been really hard having people think I'm a liar." Emma leaned forward, lowering her voice even further. "Can I ask you something? What's it like having your mom deployed?" "My brother's been gone for 8 months, and sometimes I worry about him constantly." Sarah felt a connection with Emma that she hadn't experienced with anyone else at school. Here was someone who understood the unique challenges of having a family member serving overseas. "It's scary sometimes," she admitted. "I worry about her every day, especially because her missions are classified. I can't even know exactly where she is or what she's doing." "That must be really hard," Emma said sympathetically. "At least with my brother, we know he's relatively safe at his base in Germany. The uncertainty would drive me crazy." Sarah nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "The worst part is not being able to talk to anyone about it. Before all this started at school, I kept quiet because I didn't want people to worry or ask too many questions. Now I can't say anything because nobody believes me anyway." Emma reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "Well, now you have someone who believes you and understands what you're going through. My brother always says that military families have to stick together." The conversation with Emma became a bright spot in Sarah's increasingly difficult school experience. They began eating lunch together regularly, and Emma even stood up for Sarah when she overheard other students making jokes about her fantasy family. However, the support of one friend wasn't enough to stop the growing campaign of disbelief that seemed to spread throughout the entire school. During gym class, when they were running laps around the track, Madison Clark jogged up beside Sarah with a group of her friends. "Hey Sarah," Madison said with false sweetness, "I was thinking about your mom, the SEAL story. Don't you think it's weird that she's never come to any school events? Like, if my mom had such an awesome job, she'd be here all the time showing off." Sarah tried to keep running and ignore the comment, but Madison and her friends matched her pace, clearly intent on continuing the conversation. "I mean, my mom came to our science fair last month and talked to everyone about her work at the bank," Madison continued. "She even brought business cards to hand out. But your mom never shows up to anything. It's almost like she doesn't exist." "She's deployed overseas," Sarah said through gritted teeth, trying to maintain her breathing rhythm while dealing with the emotional stress of the confrontation. "Sure she is," laughed Jessica Palmer, one of Madison's closest friends. "That's convenient. She can't come to school because she's fighting secret wars somewhere. Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds?" Sarah stopped running abruptly, causing the group of girls to halt as well. "My mother is risking her life to serve our country," she said, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. "Just because you can't understand what that means doesn't make it less true." "Prove it," Madison challenged, crossing her arms over her chest. "If your mom is really a Navy SEAL, there has to be some way to prove it." Official documents, news articles, something. You can't just expect us to take your word for it. Sarah felt trapped. The nature of her mother's work meant that most details were classified. Maria had explained that special operations personnel often had limited public profiles for security reasons. Their families were instructed to be cautious about sharing information that could compromise ongoing missions or put the service members at risk. Some things about military service are private, Sarah explained, but she could see that her classmates interpreted her explanation as an admission that she was making everything up. How convenient, Madison said with a smirk. Everything about your mom's supposed job is top secret and can't be proven. That's exactly what someone would say if they were lying. The group of girls jogged away, leaving Sarah standing alone on the track. She could hear their laughter fading as they put distance between themselves and her, and she knew they were already planning how to share this latest confrontation with their other friends. That evening at dinner, Sarah's father noticed her unusually quiet demeanor. David had been trying to keep their household running smoothly while his wife was deployed, but he was also dealing with his own stress about Maria's safety and the challenges of single parenting. "How was school today, sweetheart?" he asked as they sat down to eat the spaghetti he had prepared. Sarah pushed the pasta around on her plate, not really hungry despite having barely eaten lunch. "It was fine," she said automatically, the same response she had been giving for weeks. David studied his daughter's face, recognizing the signs of distress that she was trying to hide. "Sarah, I know something's been bothering you. You've been different ever since your mom deployed, and I don't think it's just because you miss her." Sarah looked up at her father, considering whether to finally tell him about what was happening at school. She could see the worry in his eyes, and she knew he was already carrying a heavy burden with her mother's absence. "Dad," she said slowly, "do you think people would believe that Mom is a SEAL if they didn't know her personally?" David raised his eyebrows, surprised by the question. "What do you mean? Has someone been questioning your mother's service?" Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "Everyone at school thinks I'm lying. They say women can't be SEALs, and they think I made it up to sound cool or important. They call me names and make jokes about our family." David's expression shifted from concern to anger. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me about this sooner? How long has this been going on?" "A few weeks," Sarah admitted. "I didn't want to worry you when you already have so much to deal with. But it's getting worse, and I don't know how to make them believe me." David reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "Honey, I'm so sorry you've been dealing with this alone. You should never feel like you can't come to me with problems, no matter what else is happening in our lives." "I know, Dad. I just didn't want to add to your stress. Sarah, you are my first priority, always. Your mother would be furious if she knew you were suffering in silence because you were trying to protect my feelings." David paused, thinking about the best way to handle the situation. "You know what? I think it's time we showed your classmates exactly who your mother is." Sarah looked at her father with hope for the first time in weeks. "How can we do that? Mom always says we have to be careful about operational security." "There are ways to share information about your mother's service without compromising anything classified," David explained. "We have photos from her graduation ceremonies, commendation letters that aren't classified, and other documentation that proves her qualifications and service record." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Do you think that would be enough to convince them?" "I think any reasonable person would be convinced by the evidence we can provide," David said firmly. "And if your classmates still choose not to believe it after seeing proof, then that says more about them than it does about our family." That night, David and Sarah went through a box of military memorabilia that they kept in their home office. They found photos of Maria in her dress uniform, receiving various awards and commendations. There were pictures from her SEAL training graduation, showing her alongside her fellow graduates, all wearing the distinctive trident pin that marked their completion of one of the military's most challenging programs. They also found letters from Maria's commanding officers praising her performance and dedication. While the specific details of her current deployment were classified, there was plenty of documented evidence of her qualifications and service history. "Look at this," David said, holding up a newspaper clipping from their local paper. "This is from when your mom received the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for her work training coalition forces." The article specifically mentions her role as a Navy SEAL. Sarah studied the article, reading about her mother's accomplishments with renewed pride. "I had forgotten about this. Mom was so embarrassed when the reporter wanted to interview her." "Your mother has never been one to seek attention for her service," David explained. "She does her job because she believes in protecting our country and helping others, not for recognition or glory. But that doesn't mean her accomplishments should be hidden when people question her qualifications." As they organized the materials, Sarah felt a growing sense of confidence. Tomorrow, she would finally have the proof she needed to silence her doubters and restore her family's honor. She had no idea that her mother's unit was about to complete their overseas mission and return home in a way that would provide even more dramatic vindication of her claims. The next morning, Sarah packed the folder of documents and photos carefully in her backpack, making sure everything was protected from damage. She felt nervous but determined as she walked through the school's front doors, knowing that today would be different from all the others she had endured over the past month. Little did she know that thousands of miles away, Lieutenant Commander Maria Martinez was preparing for a mission that would bring her back to American soil much sooner than anyone expected, and in circumstances that would forever change how her daughter's classmates viewed the truth about military service and the extraordinary people who dedicate their lives to protecting others. Sarah walked into Jefferson Middle School that Thursday morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The folder containing her mother's military documentation felt substantial in her backpack, like carrying a piece of armor that would finally protect her from the weeks of ridicule and disbelief. She had spent the previous evening reviewing each document with her father, memorizing the details and preparing for the moment when she would finally be able to prove the truth about Lieutenant Commander Maria Martinez's service. Her first class was English with Mrs. Henderson, the same teacher who had initially asked her to share about her family weeks earlier. Sarah took her usual seat in the back corner of the classroom, but today she sat a little straighter, her confidence bolstered by the knowledge that she finally had evidence to support her claims. As students filed into the classroom and took their seats, Sarah noticed the familiar whispers and glances that had become part of her daily routine. Jake Thompson was telling a story to his friends about a movie he had watched about Navy SEALs, making exaggerated gestures and speaking loudly enough for Sarah to hear. "The thing about real SEALs," Jake was saying with authority, "is that they're all huge, muscular guys who can bench press like 400 pounds. They have to pass these impossible physical tests that would kill most people. There's no way a woman could ever make it through that training." Madison Clark nodded in agreement. "Exactly. And they're always in the news and magazines. My dad has magazines about military stuff, and all the SEALs in them are men. If there were women SEALs, don't you think they'd be famous?" Sarah listened to their conversation, her jaw clenching with frustration. She thought about the countless hours her mother had spent training, the sacrifices she had made to prove herself worthy of serving alongside the most elite soldiers in the world. Maria had shared stories about the grueling selection process, the mental and physical challenges that pushed candidates beyond their limits, and the pride she felt in earning her place among such distinguished warriors. Mrs. Henderson called the class to order and began discussing their current reading assignment, a novel about courage and perseverance in the face of adversity. As the teacher spoke about the protagonist's struggle to prove herself in a world that doubted her abilities, Sarah felt the parallels to her own situation. Sometimes, Mrs. Henderson explained, the most powerful form of courage is continuing to stand for what you know to be true, even when others refuse to believe you. Truth has a way of revealing itself to those who are patient and persistent. Sarah raised her hand, surprising both herself and her teacher with her sudden participation. "Mrs. Henderson, what should someone do if they have proof of the truth, but they're afraid people still won't believe them?" The teacher looked at Sarah with interest, sensing there was more to the question than academic curiosity. "Well, Sarah, I think the best approach is to present the evidence clearly and let the facts speak for themselves. Truth doesn't require belief to remain true, but sometimes people need to see concrete evidence before they can accept something that challenges their assumptions." Jake Thompson turned around in his seat with his familiar smirk. "Are you still going on about your SEAL mom, Sarah?"
Give it up already. Nobody believes you.
Actually, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart, I have something to show everyone.
Real evidence.
The classroom fell silent, and Mrs. Henderson looked intrigued.
What kind of evidence, Sarah?
Sarah reached into her backpack and pulled out the folder her father had helped her prepare. I have official documents, photographs, and newspaper articles about my mother's military service.
I brought them to show anyone who wants to see the proof. Madison Clark laughed nervously. Oh please, you probably just printed some fake stuff off the internet. Anyone can make fake documents these days.
These aren't fake, Sarah replied firmly. She opened the folder and pulled out the newspaper clipping from the local paper.
This is from the Riverside Daily News from 2 years ago. You can look it up online if you want to verify it's real.
She passed the article to Mrs. Henderson, who read it carefully. The teacher's eyebrows rose as she absorbed the details about Lieutenant Commander Maria Martinez receiving the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for her work training coalition forces overseas. This appears to be a legitimate news article, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice filled with surprise and what sounded like admiration. It specifically identifies your mother as a Navy SEAL and describes her accomplishments in detail. Sarah felt a surge of vindication as she watched her teacher's expression change from skepticism to respect.
That's just one piece of evidence. I have more.
She pulled out a photograph of her mother in dress uniform, standing at attention during a ceremony where she was receiving a commendation. The image clearly showed the distinctive SEAL Trident pin on her uniform, along with various ribbons and medals that marked her years of distinguished service. Jake Thompson craned his neck to see the photograph, his confident smirk beginning to fade.
That could be anybody in uniform. How do we know that's really your mom? Sarah had anticipated this objection.
She pulled out a family photo showing herself, her father, and her mother together at a military family event. Maria was wearing the same dress uniform from the ceremony photo, making it clear that the decorated SEAL in the official military photograph was indeed Sarah's mother.
This is us at the Navy Family Day celebration last year, Sarah explained.
You can see it's the same person, and you can see me and my dad with her. The classroom had become completely quiet except for the sound of papers rustling as Mrs. Henderson examined each piece of evidence. Other students began to lean forward in their seats, trying to get a better look at the documents that were challenging everything they had believed about Sarah's family. Sarah, Mrs. Henderson said slowly, these documents appear to be completely authentic. I owe you an apology for not taking your claims more seriously. Sarah felt tears of relief beginning to form in her eyes. After weeks of being dismissed as a liar and attention seeker, having an adult authority figure acknowledge the truth felt like a tremendous validation.
Madison Clark, however, wasn't ready to back down completely. Okay, so maybe your mom really is in the military. But being in the Navy doesn't automatically make someone a SEAL.
Lots of people serve in the military without being special forces.
Sarah had expected this line of questioning as well.
She pulled out another document, this one showing her mother's completion of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, commonly known as BUD/S. The certificate clearly listed Maria Martinez as having successfully completed the rigorous program that produced Navy SEALs. This is her BUD/S completion certificate, Sarah explained. You can't get this unless you actually complete SEAL training.
And here's another photo from her graduation ceremony.
The photograph showed Maria standing with her BUD/S class, all wearing the distinctive brown t-shirts that marked their successful completion of one of the military's most challenging training programs. Sarah pointed to her mother among the group of graduates, her face showing the exhaustion and pride that came with surviving months of grueling physical and mental challenges. Tyler Walsh, who had been relatively quiet during the presentation, finally spoke up. I looked up women in the SEALs on my phone, he said, holding up his device. It says here that women have only been allowed to try for SEAL training since 2016, and very few have actually made it through.
That's right, Sarah confirmed. My mom was one of the first women to successfully complete the program.
She had to work twice as hard as everyone else just to prove she belonged there. Emma Chen, who had been Sarah's lone supporter during the difficult weeks, smiled with genuine happiness for her friend.
This is amazing, Sarah.
Your mom sounds incredible. Jake Thompson looked uncomfortable as he examined the evidence that clearly contradicted everything he had said about women being unable to serve as SEALs. Well, I guess maybe some women can do it, he mumbled, his earlier confidence completely deflated.
Mrs. Henderson looked at the class with a serious expression.
I think this is an important lesson for all of us about making assumptions and judging others without having all the facts. Sarah has been telling us the truth about her mother's service, and, instead of believing her, we questioned her honesty. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. While she was relieved to finally have her claims validated, she couldn't help but think about all the hurt and isolation she had endured over the past month. The damage to her confidence and trust in her classmates would take time to repair. I want everyone in this class to think about how their words and actions affected Sarah, Mrs. Henderson continued. We talked earlier about courage and perseverance. Sarah showed both of those qualities by continuing to stand by the truth even when everyone around her expressed doubt. Madison Clark looked genuinely embarrassed for the first time since the whole situation had begun.
Sarah, I'm sorry I didn't believe you. Your mom sounds really amazing.
Other students began to murmur their own apologies, and Sarah could see that the dynamic in the classroom had shifted dramatically. Where there had been mockery and disbelief, there was now respect and curiosity about her mother's extraordinary service. Can you tell us more about what your mom does? Asked Jessica Palmer, who had been one of Madison's most vocal supporters in questioning Sarah's claims. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest as she realized that her classmates were now genuinely interested in learning about her mother's work, rather than trying to prove she was lying. She can't talk about most of her current mission because it's classified, but she's told me about some of her training and previous deployments.
For the next 20 minutes, Sarah found herself surrounded by classmates who were eager to hear about the realities of SEAL.